I should have been scared to death. But my original business plan had me not making anything for 3 years.
Hello and welcome to episode 94 of the Smart Agents Podcast. My name is Michael Walter and I'll be your host. In today's episode, we are joined by a true pioneer in her field. Named top woman land broker in the U.S. by REALTORS Land Institute in 2021, Nancy Surak has found huge success in a male-dominated field over the last 2 decades. Throughout our conversation, Nancy shares how she broke into the industry after a 13-year career outside of real estate and how she's been able to achieve such great success. Now, before we get on to the day's featured interview, make sure to subscribe to the Smart Agents Podcast. You can find the show on all major podcasting platforms such as Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and now Amazon Music. Also, if you or someone else on your team has an awesome story or tips to share with our community, send us a message at feedback@smartagents.com. We're always on the lookout for new stories to share. All right, let's get on to the day's featured interview with Nancy. I highly recommend checking out her podcast, She's Wild, where she speaks with fellow female leaders to inspire and motivate more women to pursue careers such as hers. I've added a link in the episode description. Just kind of getting started out, I'd love for you to introduce yourself a little bit to us and kind of your background in the real estate profession.
Sure. My name is Nancy Surak, and I am the managing broker and the senior land advisor for the Land Advisors Organization in the Tampa Bay region of Florida. I've been a land broker for almost 20 years here on the west coast of Florida and do all types of land that are primarily heading towards some phase of development. It could be pre-development, it could be immediate development, but that's my business background. And it's been great. I absolutely love what I do and love working with landowners.
Right. So what got you, wanting to go that route and into more of this type of real estate?
So I have to always give credit to my dad on these types of questions. When I was a teenager, he actually strongly encouraged me to go into the commercial real estate arena. And he was invested in a self-storage development deal. He lost all of his money. It was an investment that he made and it scared the crap out of me. But he kept telling me, even though he had a really pretty negative experience, that he thought I would be really good in the space. And, like most teenagers, I just kind of waved him off and said, what do you know? And look, you didn't really know as much as you thought you knew because you lost all your money. But so I went to college, got a couple of degrees. And when I graduated from the University of Florida with my master's degree, my dad basically said again, you should get your real estate license. You're sitting in the state of Florida. I brushed him off again. And it took me about 13 years of working in corporate America in various roles that I sort of kind of came back and said, hey, Dad, I've been thinking a lot about what I want to do next in my career. And I think I'm going to get my real estate license. And he's like, I knew it. But really, it came through for me. I was a young mom and I had managed to create a career for myself in business development and outside sales that was phenomenal. And I had all these great tools and resources available to me. I had a company car. I had an expense account. I had managed to get the company I worked with at the time to reduce my in-person hours to 30 hours a week. So from a young working mom perspective, I had everything, but I didn't have this strong feeling of that I was where I was meant to be. And I thought I could make a lot more money. And so I sat down with my husband and said, hey, I think I want to go into brokerage. And what do you think? And he's like, well, let's put together a business plan, or you put together a business plan. So we sat down for months together. And I sort of outlined what I thought I wanted to do. I interviewed a ton of real estate brokers in the Tampa Bay region. Everybody wanted me to go into office brokerage. And I was like, that's not it. I'm too much of I like to wear jeans as much as possible. I like being out in the field. I love the development side of the business. So I kept saying, no, I think I want to be in land. And, I looked around and I was like, there are so few women in land. Maybe I can do that and I'll be different. I didn't realize that being different meant it was going to be a lot harder. But yeah, no, that's how I got started as I got my license and started focusing on land and never looked back.
Right. So, one of the things I think, especially in the land and the commercial real estate realm is it's not, those commission checks are a little bit few, they're a little bit far between. It's not, those deals aren't always kind of rolling in. So what was that like to jump into that?
Really scary, actually. And I'm really glad that you asked that question because especially when the market is the way it is right now in Florida, a lot of a lot of agents want to jump into the land space. It looks easy from the outside. It's not. It's in hot demand right now. And so they think, oh, well, I'm going to go where the demand is. It is a substantial waiting game. When I first got in, I interviewed, I think 10 or 12 different brokers and said, what's your sales cycle like? And I should have been scared to death, right? I was scared, but my original business plan had me not making anything for 3 years. Yeah. And I was really, really fortunate that the first deal I got involved with, I turned it around from my first meeting to closing in 6 months. But that is not typical. And even in my current business model, a land deal normally takes between 12 and 36 months to close from the first meeting with a landowner or a buyer. Right now, the market is such that it could be as fast as about 90 days and as long as about 24 months. So it kind of ebbs and flows with what's happening in the market overall. But I had to really prepare financially to take that huge jump. And I could not have done it, honestly, without having a secondary source of income, without my husband's income. We scaled back on everything. I, basically stopped spending a ton of discretionary money and said, I'm going to just continue to reinvest in myself. And really, even the first deal I did, I put it right back into my business. And I said, okay, I just bought myself more time. And a lot of people who will come to me and say, I think I want to be in land brokerage. I'm like, okay, well, do you have 18 months of your salary saved? Because if you don't, you could potentially get yourself into trouble.
Yeah.
But it's very scary.
Yeah. And I think that's like one of the biggest differences is having that safety net, for a long period of time and to really kind of put together, like you said, you really worked on this business plan and really flesh things out before you get going.
Yeah, I definitely did. And I do it every year still, and even just had this conversation with my husband this week where he said, you're always so paranoid that you're not going to do well. He's like, you do so well. And I'm like, yeah, if I don't have that hunger in my belly, then I'm going to get lazy and I won't make any money. But yeah, just being really thoughtful as to where the client's going to come from, how long it's going to take to do deals, and being very aware of that. But knowing that, when I close a deal, one deal in the land business could be like 10 homes, in the residential space, but I might only have 3 of those if I'm lucky in a year. And so I've had years where I've done speaking engagements and it's like the end of September. And I'm like, yeah, I haven't made anything this year yet. And I'm freaking out, but it just happens to be that in that particular year, every single deal was going to close in the fourth quarter. So I have to constantly have a hamster wheel going and I'm constantly throwing deals out and just trying to make sure that I've got something planned and being very aware of that.
Right. And like what you said, with your first deal, you're buying yourself more time. And I think that's a lot, I think when people are starting out in any realm of the real estate business, that those first several deals, it really is buying yourself time to get things really kind of churning.
Yep. Every deal. And my kids have watched us too, where, I'll celebrate a really massive deal that I've worked on for years. And I'll get really excited and I'm like, we'll have this great dinner. And they're like, okay, can we do this? And I'm like, no. I live off of last year's results always. And I've done that since the very beginning. And so for me, like, it doesn't really matter how great the year is that I'm having because I'm living off of last year in terms of how much money am I willing to spend on myself and in my personal life.
Right. How have you been able to stay disciplined with that? Because I think that can be really difficult.
I've been doing it for so long that it comes rather natural now that I'm always like, okay, is the market going to shift? what's going to happen. Because that's the other thing in land transactions, because the time of the sale is so long. And I'll define that a little bit better. So due diligence is common in residential real estate. Due diligence for me can be 12 months, 18 months long. There's a lot of things that can go wrong.
Right.
When you give somebody that much time. The market can change, wars break out, demand shifts, interest rates rise, like we're seeing right now,
or, global pandemics.
Recessions, recessions start, global pandemics happen. So there's a lot of things that can affect a deal that will cause it to drop.
Yeah.
You have to be ready for that. It's really, really intense. So discipline is very, very key because you just never know what's going to happen.
Right. And, I think the discipline also is just, it's kind of when things are extended for as long as they are, you've got multiple deals. And so being able to stay disciplined and keep track of everything with the individual deals over that long period of time as things get added to it or close, I think is super important as well.
Yeah, communication is really high up there in terms of what I would consider one of my number one skill sets is being able to ask difficult questions and communication and really staying on top of things, like being very process oriented and knowing where a deal is at every single stage, what's happening, and making sure that buyers are performing the way they're supposed to. So there are no big surprises.
Right. When you're doing these land deals, what are some of those steps that, you talked about the due diligence and everything that kind of goes along with it? So like really kind of the steps from the beginning to the end process of these land deals.
So it's a lot of different steps. And it really depends. My steps depend on which side of the deal I'm working on, where my fiduciary relationship lies. So if I'm working with a buyer, there is a series of steps. If I'm working with a seller, I'm doing similar steps, but they might be a little bit of a different things kind of come and go. But primarily if I'm working with a landowner and we're listing a property, I'm looking at what is their property? What's the highest and best use? What's the zoning? What's it entitled for? And either I'm having the landowner educate me or I'm educating the landowner. And quite frequently it's the latter. I'm educating the landowner as to what they own, what could go there from a development perspective, what sort of valuations that are happening in the marketplace. So that's a big, big chunk of the front end of the work. And then from that discussion, once a listing agreement is signed, I'm then strategizing on how I'm going to take it to the marketplace. And I'm using a lot of the same things. What is the property zone? What can be built there? What's in demand in the overall community? What could be built on that particular property? And then I'm strategizing to, who's doing that and understanding what the buyers are that are seeking that sort of particular end product. And then I'm pitching them. So I pitch them, I market, making tons and tons of phone calls. Unlike other types of real estate, it's not just like throwing a sign up on a property and putting an ad on the internet. Like I literally have to phone everyone. I have to dial for dollars, and I'm pitching the property and pitching like why somebody should be paying attention to it. Now I have all those other bases covered. I have signs. I'm on, a bunch of different platforms for advertising. But I'm really talking about trying to gain the interest. And then once offers start to trickle in, depending on how much in demand the property is, it could be just a matter of responding to the offers as they come in and educating my seller as to what they, whether or not it's legitimate or they should be paying attention to it or countering it or accepting it. Or if it's super, super competitive, we might have a different strategy of doing a call for best and final offers, and then managing that whole process, which is a whole nother box of things that sometimes I get to do that's a lot of fun. And then once we settle on a buyer, we enter a purchase and sale agreement. And again, unlike the residential space, that you use a state contract. Land contracts are usually individually created for that particular transaction. They can run anywhere from about probably 15 to 60 pages of legal contractual language. It's a lot. that I have to read. And I'm not an attorney, but I have to still read it. And quite frequently, I'm like telling the attorneys, like, pay particular attention to these sections, just because of my, my knowledge and my experience. But a purchase and sale agreement can take about 30 to 45 days to negotiate. So you get your offer, you select your buyer, and then it's another 30 or 45 days till you're under contract. Go under contract, and then the fun happens. That's when the work really begins. That's when due diligence happens for the buyer. So they're ordering, their studies, their surveys, their environmental assessments, looking at the overall market, their marketing studies. They might be taking it through some preliminary entitlement work, whether that may be rezoning or something like that. Rezoning, they might be filing for permits. So it just really, each deal is so unique that it just really depends. But once a buyer, especially a developer, has typically their permits for construction, then they would be looking at their final funding. And I don't get involved so much in the funding element, but it does come up on a number of my deals. And I might be talking with some equity groups and helping them better understand the overall marketplace. And then from funding, we go into closing, and I get to celebrate with a commission or a success fee, as we like to call it. But then my work doesn't really stop there. I monitor like early development, not for either party, but it's really where I can gain my marketing tidbits. That's where I kind of talk about the project and my involvement in the project. Because typically up until a deal closes, I try to keep it as close and as quiet as possible. I don't want folks to come and try to blow up my deal. So I try really, really hard to like not say a lot publicly as much as possible. And then I can, go from there. Once I've been paid, then I'll, if I'm not under a confidentiality agreement, I'll tell whoever will listen, about whatever it is that we did.
Right.
There's a lot of steps.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you're talking about trying to keep things, really kind of tight-lipped until the close, until everything's really done. I'd imagine that when it comes to the actual marketing for, land brokers, people like yourself, it's not so much that, the marketing is very different in the way it's more that kind of almost like word of mouth, I guess, like your success and the way that you've been able to work with these individuals, like their success and seeing who is handling those deals. Is that how you really kind of gain new deals, or how do you really kind of market yourself to start getting these new landowners?
So there's a bunch of different ways. Word of mouth is big. I have a piece of paper that from years and years ago that I saved over the years, where it's like kind of a bullseye, right? Mm-hmm. A, the center of the eye are your primary clients. B, are the people who can most influence them. And C is like kind of everybody else, right? So for a lot of the landowners, either I'm going straight to the bullseye and I'm marketing directly to them and telling them my story and my success, or I'm spending a lot of time in the B ring so that, the tax accountant or the family's attorney or other folks who are of a professional nature could influence that person, and they know who I am. And I get a decent amount of business from that. And then typically once I'm in an inner circle with professionals, they tend to throw my name out on other deals as well. But it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort to cultivate those relationships. So I do a little bit of everything. I do a decent amount of like PR and talk to media when I get asked to, and that's really scary for me. Like, I don't really like to do it. I don't like to see myself on video. I don't like to hear myself, but I recognize how important it is overall to just my business.
Right. Absolutely. It's all that kind of authority building. And yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So one of the things I do want to kind of switch gears a little bit, and because I'm really interested in, the podcast you have yourself, and really, this passion for helping young professional women, kind of get started.
Yeah. So thank you for asking me about that. So I grew up in a family mostly of girls. So there were 5 children. I have 1 brother. I was raised, my dad raised us all girls to be just like super strong and independent, and basically told us like we could do anything we set our mind to. as long as we were willing to work hard. And so that was really my foundation. And then I got out into real world. And then I got into the land brokerage industry, and I'm like, oh crap, I'm like the only woman in the room. Like, what have I done? And I do lean into that. It is a differentiator for me, but it is still, there are hurdles there that other people just don't have. And when I say other people, I mean men. And I understand when people say things like systemic issues, because you don't even realize it. Like I tell the stories about, I don't get invited on hunting trips in my market, yet every major home builder, land ac guy is going to a hunting trip on the weekend with the engineers and the other male land brokers. Well, I don't get invited on that. And that doesn't mean that I'm not really damn good at what I do, but it's not even a thought. So I have to figure out a way to kind of get in front of all those people in a different way and build really sustainable relationships. So after years and years of just saying like, hey, this isn't fair. Not that it got in the way of my success, because it never, ever did, but it was frustrating for me to be like, I can't do that. I'm not allowed, or it's not okay, or whatever. I finally said, you know what? I'm going to try to do what I can to raise other women in the business. There's more and more of us. And if I can do that, then at least I'll know I did my little part of helping other people be successful. And, prior to COVID, for about 3 years, I was the chairperson for the Women's Leadership Initiative for the Urban Land Institute on the west coast of Florida in the Tampa Bay region, and did a lot of programming for women engineering professionals and architects and contractors and developers and other land brokers, and really fell into a strong passion for wanting to see other women and other young people really succeed in the business. So I've been doing that for years. It's just who I am. It's something I believe very, very strongly in. And then when COVID hit, I felt like all of that programming just kind of stopped. And I've seen all the headlines with women, went back into like teaching their kids if they had children at home, or trying to balance like home family life if they were more in the home environment. And so after, 2 years of just seeing that, I was like, okay, enough already. Like, I've got to create a podcast that I can talk to other professional women across North America and have them share their career stories. So I started thinking about it. I had a couple of friends that, were cheering me on, and they were like, you should so do this. But it really became a function of me trying to help other women connect in the business. And also, I'm a huge podcast consumer, and I listened to tons of audiobooks, and I was like, I was running out of content. So I started looking for women in my space, women developers, women in land, and I couldn't find it. And so finally I was like, you know what? Everybody keeps telling me I should do a podcast. I'm looking for this content. Maybe this is the content. Because at first I thought, I'll just do a podcast on being a land broker, because that seemed to make sense from a business perspective. But then I was like, no, I'm going to seek out women across North America that are in my business that I admire, and I'm going to interview them. And that's how the podcast started. It's called She's Wild. And it's all about women in land and development. And it's been really, really cool.
Right. Well, I don't want to give away, too many of, the things that people can gain from your podcast. But one of the things that, especially with your story also, that that's interested me here is what, when it comes time for that career change, or, like you said, that there was always that something, else that you were looking for. What is it, that can help, push people towards actually making that jump, but then also giving them the confidence to do so?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because I work on confidence as kind of like a regular thing, and self-motivation. And I get that question sometimes when they're like, well, what keeps you motivated? I'm like, I don't know. It's just who I am. But that's not really a truthful answer. It's like, I work on it every single day. And so it's like people who, are world-class athletes, they work on their sport or their athleticism every day. And so I do that just on my mindset every single day. Like who am I going after today? What's going to be the win? And before I go to bed at night, I'm like, okay, what was my win today? What worked for me? So for me, when you talk about people changing in their careers, for me, it was just paying attention to that. I didn't feel like I had reached it yet. I wasn't at the top. I was close. I was happy. I wasn't unhappy, but I just had this pull, this crazy internal pull to do something else. And luckily I was in a situation where I could say like, what is it? And do a lot of homework. And I kept going back to my childhood, like, oh, I was the little girl playing in the dirt. I was the one building, the house with my Barbie. Like Barbie was the developer in my world or the contractor, and started to really string together like all the things I'd been told, over the course of my life, or the things I was super attracted to, and recognize that, yeah, there was something else out there. And, land brokerage seemed to make perfect sense for me. But I had to pay a lot of attention to what was happening in my career and why was I feeling like I wasn't there? And, was it money? And, for me, it was a little bit, but that wasn't it. Mm-hmm. It certainly wasn't flexibility, although that was helpful because I'd already gotten that. But I think it was just this desire to want to do something different and then being willing to take a gamble on myself.
Yeah, absolutely. I think once that, that kind of, that desire to just kind of want to change, like a change of scenery almost. And yeah. I think it's really important to explore those options, no matter what career path you're on or what industry you're in, is when you kind of have that, everybody's going to go through those kind of slumps, but if it's prolonged and you always have that kind of nagging, I think it's important to really kind of explore what other options are out there for you.
Yeah, I think too, because I've had good friends do things or family members, and they'll say, how did you know when it was time? And I said, pay particular attention to how you feel Sunday night after 7:30. If you are dreading, and I mean dreading, like you have anxiety riddled, like just uncomfortable feelings internally, like you feel it, that weight of, oh my God, I have to work tomorrow. Or, oh, this is going to happen this week. And I'm not talking about when you're pursuing some big, like, huge new project, right? Because that's normal anyway. I'm talking about it is consistent. It is there every Sunday. You cannot shake it. Pay attention to that. It's your body is telling you something's not okay. And then also look at, for me, really paying attention to the conversations I had with my kids. They were young when I got into brokerage. They were young, a little bit older when I started the Land Advisors location here in the Tampa Bay region. But really the conversations I was having with them and the advice I was giving them was advice that I needed to give myself.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today.
You bet. I appreciate you having me.
I want to thank Nancy for taking the time to speak with us today, and remember to check out her podcast, She's Wild. I've dropped a link in the episode description. So once again, if you think you or someone else on your team has an awesome story or tip to share with our community, send us a message at feedback@smartagents.com. Well, that wraps things up for this episode, but remember, follow the show wherever you listen to podcasts, and make sure to subscribe to the Smart Agents YouTube channel. Again, I'm Michael Walter, and we'll see you on the next episode.